Once upon a time, in a perfectly ordinary apartment, a perfectly ordinary clay human had a perfectly ordinary thought in the shower. The thought was this: people should really hear what I think. Not about anything in particular, just, in general. It was a small thought, a warm, harmless, slightly damp little thought, and it would go on to consume 2 foam microphones, 1 beanbag chair, and an entire friendship. We will call our hero the aspiring host. He was not a journalist. He was not an expert. He had never actually finished an audiobook, but he had opinions and a phone and a deep, unshakable sense that the world was simply sitting there, waiting to subscribe. And this is where the trouble began. Because the moment our hero finished that shower thought, something stirred. Out of the drain of the modern internet, in a puff of cheap blue light, rose a creature as old as ambition and as new as a USB cable. We will call him the Podcast Genie. He did not come from a lamp. He came from a microphone, and he granted exactly one wish to absolutely everyone, whether they asked for it or not. You, said the genie, pointing a long clay finger, should start a podcast. Now, the genie was not a liar. That was the genius of him. Everything he promised was technically possible. A microphone really does cost less than dinner. Your phone really can record. 2 friends really can sit on a couch and talk for an hour, and somewhere, theoretically, a stranger might listen. The genie never oversold. He simply opened a door marked easy and let human vanity walk through it on its own. So our hero walked through. He bought a microphone shaped like a small chrome trophy. He bought a foam shield to protect the world from his plosives. He bought a ring light, because a podcast is an audio format, and obviously the most important thing about audio is how you look while making it. He bought headphones big enough to land a plane, and he felt, for the first time in his life, like a professional. The genie watched all this with the patient smile of a creature who has seen it 10 million times. Because here is the thing the genie knew, and our hero did not. By some counts, there are now more than 4 million podcasts in the world, and only about 1 in 10 of them is still breathing. The rest are out there in the dark, frozen mid-sentence, 2 episodes deep, waiting for a host who is never coming back. But our hero did not know that yet. Our hero was busy naming the show. This took 4 days. The name had to be clever, but not too clever. Mysterious, but searchable. It had to suggest depth, wisdom, and a vague promise of unfiltered honesty. He landed on something with a colon in it, because nothing says serious thinker like a colon. And then, the most sacred ritual of all, he recruited a co-host. The co-host was his best friend, who had agreed during a party, in the way people agree to help you move. Vaguely, warmly, without reading the fine print. Together, they would sit on the beanbag, lean into the microphones, and do the one thing the format truly required: talk about anything for a very, very long time. Episode 1 was a triumph. They were nervous and loud and laughed at their own jokes, and at the end they leaned in and said the magic words that bind every podcast in the land. Smash that subscribe button. The genie, hovering nearby, felt a little glow of pride. Another one. Another mouth fed into the great churning silence. 3 people listened. 1 was his mother. 1 was the co-host's mother. 1 was a bot in another country who instantly regretted it. But that was fine. Our hero decided. You build an audience slowly. Episode 2 would be tighter. Episode 3 would find its rhythm. The genie nodded along, because the genie loves Episode 3. Episode 3 is where he keeps most of his food. Researchers who track these things found that nearly half of all podcasts never make it past Episode 3. Not because the hosts ran out of opinions. Opinions are infinite. They ran out of the much rarer thing: the reason to keep going when nobody is clapping. By episode 4, the cracks appeared. Scheduling became a negotiation. The co-host had a thing, then another thing. The microphone, once a trophy, now sat on the desk like a small chrome accusation. Recording stopped feeling like a dream and started feeling like homework assigned by your past self, who you were beginning to dislike. And the topics began to wander. With no listeners to please, the show became two tired friends explaining the news to each other, slightly wrong. They reviewed a sandwich. They argued about whether birds are real. They did a deep dive into a documentary neither of them had watched. The Genie found this the most beautiful part. A show with no audience is the purest form of the art. It is just two people talking into foam, performing a podcast for an audience made entirely of themselves. Then came the silence. Not a decision. Nobody ever decides to quit a podcast. There is no finale, no farewell, no tasteful final episode thanking the listeners who were never there. There is only a gap. A week becomes a month. The thing has a name. The polite word for it is pod fade, and it is the quietest death in all of modern media. The show does not end. It simply stops answering. Soon the apartment held a small graveyard. The trophy microphone, gathering dust. The ring light, never turned on again. The headphones, big enough to land a plane that had long since been canceled. And out in the dark, our hero's show joined the silent millions. Frozen at episode 4, forever. A tiny monument to a shower thought that aimed slightly too high. You might think the Genie would feel some remorse, but the Genie is not cruel. He genuinely wanted everyone to have a voice. He simply never mentioned that having a voice and having something to say are two completely different microphones. He gave the whole world a stage and forgot to mention that a stage is just a quiet room with better lighting. And so the fable ends, the way it always does. One day, months later, our hero is back in the shower, and a new thought arrives, warm and damp and harmless. Maybe, he thinks, the real problem was the format. Maybe what he needs is a newsletter, or a YouTube channel, or one of those little videos where you point at words that float beside your head. The Genie, who was already there, smiled, because the Genie does not need you to succeed. He only needs you to begin. He has all the microphones in the world, and all the time, and a fresh shower thought arriving somewhere on Earth roughly every 4 seconds. You, he whispered, should really start a podcast. And somewhere, a foam microphone switched on.